Welcome to Financial Repression Authority's Roundtable Insight, where the best fund managers, economists, and industry leaders discuss the key investment issues and challenges in the current macroeconomic environment.
Hi, welcome to today's Roundtable Insight. I'm the host, Richard Benuli. Today is Thursday, November 30th, and we have returning guest Charles Hugh Smith. He's author, leading global finance blogger, and America's philosopher, we call him. He's the author of several books on economy and society, including A Radically Beneficial World, Automation, Technology, and Creating Jobs for All, Resistance, Revolution, Liberation, a Model for Positive Change, and The Nearly Free University and the Emerging Economy, and another one, Pathfinding Our Destiny, Preventing the Final Fall of Our Democratic Republic, and also another one, Will You Be Richer or Poorer? And also, actually, most recently, Global Crisis, National Renewal, a Revolutionary Grand Strategy for the United States. And his blog of twominds.com is one of CNBC's top alternative finance sites. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm looking forward to our topic today.
Yeah, this is part of our ongoing vision series of what we see as the best type of characteristics for economic systems, governing systems, jobs, what people should do. And today I thought we'd cover a topic which might be an interim strategy between now and 2032, and that is for moving overseas from the or out of the indebted Western world. Indebted Western world being where there's unsustainable debt, namely places like U.S., Canada, Western Europe, UK, maybe Australia, New Zealand, Japan, those countries versus the global South, which is expanding and lots of economic growth happening, essentially from the Fertile Crescent in Kazakhstan all the way down Southeast Asia, East Asia, into Latin America, all of Africa, and into the Middle East, essentially that whole section in there. So it's a lot of countries. There's a lot of economic activity going on. So we wanted to explore why moving overseas could be a solution for some people, but also temper it with what are the advantages, disadvantages, obstacles, and downsides, as well as the upsides. So yeah, your initial thoughts on this, Charles?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, this is a topic that, of course, it's an evergreen topic. In other words, there's always been expatriate culture, and it's often been very lively. And we can go back to um, Hemingway and in Paris and so on post-war. And so there's always been an appeal for anybody with who's sort of a restless, creative person who like to interact with different cultures and other travelers. So this is like it's not something new per se to live overseas or live overseas part of the year. But what is new is that there's a tremendous economic pressure on many young people in the West, and I'm specifically in the United States. The as one expat put it, a young man, he said, "The American dream is no longer affordable in America, so you have to go abroad." And I personally know some millennials who have basically said, "I can't afford to live in the United States anymore because the healthcare is too arcane, too complicated, too expensive, and so is rent and everything else." And so the there's a huge cost advantage to moving overseas, and and much of life that's unaffordable in the West becomes more affordable in less developed countries. And so there's that element of it. And then the other big difference now is that, say, 60 years ago, you would have probably been unable to make a living unless you were married to a local person who had uh, come in for you if you or you spoke the language well enough to work as a local. Nowadays, of course, we have fast internet everywhere in the world almost, and so then therefore you can work remotely, and that, of course, is a huge change. And I myself, in small ways, can report that whenever I'm overseas, I can continue to do my blog and my writing and all that stuff. And there's many other people who have online work that they can live anywhere too. And so if you're barely scraping by in the US or Western Europe with your remote work, you can live really well elsewhere if you're able to or willing to make the move. So on top of all that, there's also, if you're getting paid in a stable currency like the US dollar or the euro, that those currencies tend to go farther in other countries with weaker currencies. So there's that benefit. And the other benefit that I think you are better placed to address, Richard, is there's lower barriers to starting a business, lower costs for doing business, and often more business friendly opportunities abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak to that as actually one of the first users of the internet in the world back in the mid 80s, back in university, quite a long time ago. I essentially set up internet businesses and internet infrastructures in different countries around the world in the 1990s. So that was my focus work, and I remember the experiences initially, like in North America, would be very limiting. So you're very pigeonholed and not allowed to do business development work if you're doing delivery work and all that. But the minute I had gone overseas, it was like I was going through a box of business cards every few weeks for a month, and doing all aspects, not only delivery but also business development, doing where can we increase sales and talking to new leads and identifying new solutions. It was just incredible. This happening in different parts of the world, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and so that was my experience. And along the way, I also worked in a couple of so-called special economic zones. One was the Dubai Internet City, and another was Putrajaya in Malaysia. So these are very interesting areas because it's very pro-business, pro-economic growth. They almost have their own legal infrastructure system set up internally as well. And it's interesting to note that there's 153 of these now going on worldwide. There's a few left in the indebted Western world, but those are sort of being phased out, like in Europe, for greater control by the government, in their jurisdictions. But yeah, in the global South, it's the opposite. There's economic growth happening, so there's lots of opportunities at the business front. Is a key point. But as you mentioned, Charles, the cost of living as well in many of these areas is much lower. So your standard of living is much higher, right? If you're making fairly good wages, and you don't even need to make as much as you have to make in the U.S. or Canada. It can be much less, and you're actually living at a higher standard of living. Your thoughts, Charles?
And I'll speak directly to that as my wife and I have liked Thailand for decades, and so we spent 6 weeks there in the last year, and it was amazing. I knew it was reasonable and still reasonable, but it's like you can live really well in Thailand for like less than $1,000 a month US, and that's renting, an air-conditioned flat or even a whole house like we did. And the food is very reasonable, and the transportation's cheap, and I mean, it's just like everything is affordable. And healthcare, you just pay cash, and it's a fraction of what you'd pay here in the States. And then I think we should mention that the, one of the reasons why the developed West is becoming so unlivable, if you will, is that there's this huge bureaucratic sclerosis And so it's
Yeah.
very difficult to get anything done. And then, of course, there can be bureaucratic log jams in many countries, and many are famous for that, right? Um, but it's like every level of the developed economies is it's difficult to get residency, it's difficult to start a business, it's difficult to get it, insurance. It's just like everything is like basically hardwired to benefit the entrenched uh, incumbents in that economy. And so to come in as somebody new starting something, you're running into more or less a buzzsaw. And in economies like France, although, and I'm kind of laughing because my brother and his wife lived in France for decades, and I visited them many times, so I'm fairly familiar with France. And so when you tell other expats who just only know French superficially, yeah, every business has to run 40% of their income under the table or else they can't survive. They're like, oh no, that's not true. And so like, well, you don't know anybody that's trying to run a small business in France, do you? So
Yeah.
and so that's that kind of bureaucratic sclerosis is deadly because it adds costs, but it doesn't add efficiency or efficacy, and it's not boosting productivity. And as you and I have often discussed, the problem with the West is that there's promises were made 50, 60 years ago to support elderly retirees at a level that the society that exists now cannot possibly fund because the workforce has shrunk, birth rates have fallen, and the cost of healthcare has skyrocketed. So, and yet that debate is ongoing. In other words, there's nobody saying we've got to make everything affordable to the workforce that's still trying to make a living here. So until that's sorted out, and the West is just relying on increasing debt to pay these entitlement expenses, until that's sorted out in a practical way, then the opportunities are really not in the West,
Yeah.
unless you have a lot of money and you have an inside connection somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the challenges. And we've talked about these challenges also in the past podcasts, like on regulatory capture, how that's hindering economic growth. And so, essentially in the indebted Western world, you've most of the jobs are what like accountant, lawyer, regulatory compliance, operations, right? You hardly ever hear design and development, except in a few sectors, but most of the sectors are hindered through the regulatory capture process, right, between regulators and legislators, um, and actually companies that are large that are writing the regulations for the politicians. Many examples of that. So, but in the global South, it's design, it's development, it's just fiendish activity, fiendish economic. Like in China, the minute you get out of these cities, you can drive at 60 miles per hour for 5 hours and see nothing but one, industrial or manufacturing plant after another for the entire 5 hour distance. So it's just amazing the level of economic activity, compared to here and the nature of the activity. So it's a bit sad too because there's such economic or intellectual capital in the West, economic potential in the West, in the indebted Western world, because of great universities, education, but yet it's not able to be tapped. So you got everybody scrambling. What kind of job can I do, or what? Hard to find interesting work that goes on what you studied about, right, in school. Um, so yeah, it's just all of these challenges, and it's likely to get worse, right? So upcoming in the next few years, given increasing challenges for servicing the level of the debt with rising interest rates, all these unfunded liabilities, it's all coming to a head. And as you mentioned and have written many times in your blog and books, It's just it's unsustainable, and it's hard for young people, right, to have the same sort of standard of living that we enjoyed, in the post World War II era. Your thoughts,
Right.
Charles? Yeah.
Another point that we should address directly, Richard, is that the world as a whole has become far more cosmopolitan than it was decades ago, largely because of the expansion of global travel and also the internet. So, in other words, you can go very many places in the world where you can get by with English. And of course, this opens a lot more opportunities than you when you went to a place and virtually no one spoke English, then you had to have some local language. And of course, there's many places in the world where that's still the case, but there within cities, for example, you can kind of get by with English, although of course it's preferable to have some local language. And another factor too is there's a lot of as you and I both know, there's a lot of people who have married people of other nationalities, and so there's a lot of mixed couples and mixed families who travel back and forth between the two homelands. And so there's also that kind of cultural mix is becoming more common where immigrants will go back home and start businesses and so on. So the increase in cosmopolitan nature is also feeding this. So you see I've read accounts where there's neighborhoods in all kinds of cities around the world that now cater to, the American or the Western European expat, and little businesses pop up to serve, their luxuries and so on. And so there's there's that element of it too. It's easier to navigate now, is what I'm saying. And so that's a point in favor of trying it. And so let's talk a little bit about the obstacles and the challenges. I'm going to mention a country that I know pretty well because I studied it in academically, the language and culture and literature of Japan, and I've been there several times and have many friends there. I'm not fluent in Nihongo, so don't get me wrong. I kind of barely
Okay.
navigate. But Japan is very interesting because its economy has kind of floundered or stagnated for decades, and so you read accounts online now where you can buy a house in Japan for $10 or $100. And of course, having spent time in rural Japan, I know exactly where these houses are and the kind of villages where they are. And it's a village of old people. All the young people left because they either couldn't get work or they didn't like the work. The work is hard, agricultural, fishing, that kind of work that's difficult, tedious, low pay. And so there's only villages of old people. And so some people have gone back there and are repopulating these places, and there's opportunities there, but you're always going to be an outsider. You're always going to be a gaijin in Japan. And so even if you marry a Japanese national, that's better than nothing, but you're still going to be an outsider. So there's always that element that you're always going to be an expat or an outsider, in some way, or in most countries of the world, even if you become fluent. So and then if you have to really learn the culture beforehand. And I think I often think it would be great to have a consultant who was an anthropologist, especially a local anthropologist, who could give you a briefing on what you don't know about how things work in whatever country you're thinking of living. And maybe you can speak to that.
Yes, that's very important, because you need to know the societal norms, the culture, especially in doing business, and even just shaking hands, or how do you conduct a meeting, uh, those type of things. So that takes some learning, and because you don't want to offend anybody, culturally. Just learning the languages you mentioned earlier helps also to demonstrate an appreciation of the culture, as well as helps you to function within the society. Although the language barrier may not be an issue, as you mentioned, a lot of people around the world now are speaking English. A lot of the business is conducted in English, and even doing like Zoom calls like we're on now. I think there's just a few months here away from migrating the AI companion feature on Zoom to be able to do simultaneous language translation, meaning I could be here talking in English, but the participants are hearing me in Mandarin Chinese, for example, or Spanish. So no need to learn the language at this point. This capability exists in other applications already today. So, if you have your cell phone, your laptop, or some type of technology equipment that can help. But it does help to learn the language as well, and it shows the appreciation of the culture, as I mentioned. Um, the uh, the issue on the outsider foreigner, yeah, that's sometimes an issue, for integration. But the more you learn about the culture, you show appreciation of the local food. It's easier, right? There's more of an acceptance, and some places are easier to integrate than others. I think some countries harder. Your thoughts, Charles?
Yeah, another element that can be an obstacle is this movement from the developed West to lower cost, more opportunistic nations. It's actually very large. I mean, there's like a huge number of young expats living around the world, and so what happens if they discover a town or a city that has a vibrant art scene or is cosmopolitan and it's got economic growth, then they'll be attracted to that place and then they'll start pushing up rents and all the other costs. And then this prices locals out. And then of course they're resentful of these wealthy Westerners coming in and jacking up the price of their hometown or their home city. So there's also that. So you can I've read advice uh, that other expats are giving to people thinking about it is do your research and don't overpay rent because then you're going to be pushing up the value of the rent for the locals as well. So be careful and try to live in places that you're paying quasi-local prices, so you're not creating inflation by your presence. So there's that element, and then of course you also have to have some socio-political economic awareness of the country's history and its governance and so on, because there can be instability and there can be and of course as a foreigner you're probably not well placed to know how to deal with political instability or economic instability. So uh, there's those questions tend not to be issues in the developed West, but they can be issues globally.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also the the issue in terms of getting a permit, like a residency permit or a citizenship, uh, that can help. So citizenship in many cases you can get from your ethnic heritage, maybe in different countries of the world, or allows you to have another passport to travel more easily. So that's one thing to consider. Residency permit as well, not meaning not necessarily getting the citizenship or even a permanent residency, but just a residency permit to live, to have the legal right to live and sometimes work in certain countries, certain jurisdictions. Probably a good idea to get those sooner rather than later, because the numbers could be, or the quotas may be filled by the time a lot of problems happen, non-linearly in the indebted Western world coming up here in the next few years. So there could be a time when it might be too late to get, not to mention the fact that any savings that people have in the indebted Western world may become less in terms of purchasing power, due to the purchasing power of the currency going lower. So you might get a situation where you want to leave, but it's just not enough money anymore like it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So those are some considerations to maybe think about it sooner rather than later. Your thoughts on that, Charles?
That's an excellent point, Richard. And I know that Thailand and other Southeast Asian nations have a residency permit that's accessible if you put some sum of money up and it stays in an account. I think is it $10,000 or 25,000? I don't know. Maybe you know exactly for these, but some of these countries have this kind of thing where you simply put up some capital and then you're granted a higher residency permit.
Yeah, and yeah, it could be that, or in some cases, especially Latin America, could be just be, do you have some income? Show us you have some money, some savings. Whereas more in like Asia, it's more of, can you invest a little bit in real estate or put some money in one of our banks or something, to get the qualification. So usually at that level. There's also a category called nomad workers. Um, there's a company that specializes also in this called nomad capitalist, and so these are a category of a worker that is more um, like digital nomads. Maybe they're doing software engineering that can be done remotely, or project management. A lot of that, most of that can be done remotely. Maybe writing proposals, RFPs, that can be done remotely. So a lot of those type jobs, digital nomads is the category as well. And many countries have specialized visas for these type of workers. So and there's some tax advantages. They don't tax you locally, maybe for certain periods of time, and you just reconcile with your residency or your home country, or where your employer is located.
Yeah, I guess I think that's excellent advice, Richard. And I guess to conclude, I would say that one of the uh, expats I know, he's Chinese American, and so he works back. He goes back and forth between the People's Republic and California. And I think that this is not an uncommon situation that immigrants from whatever generation can still make connections. And I would kind of describe it. I think he said it's like the era of the triumph of the sovereign individual. In other words, the talented individual, regardless of ethnicity, uh, religion, nationality, that individual has so much more opportunity now in the world. And that's really what we're talking about, the triumph of the sovereign individual.
Yeah, and just needing a bit of getting out of the comfort zone, take a bit of risk. Yes, you not know what's on the other side, but in most cases, it turns out to be a move for the better.
Yeah, and of course I'm a big fan. It doesn't work if you have children and so on, but if you don't have children, then you can also live part-time. I have friends that live part-time in China, and then the rest of the time in California. So if you can swing a way to kind of establish a permanent base, but you don't have to be there 24/7, 365, then you can go back and forth as business and interest permits. So there's that option too. It's not an either or. You can go and set up a base camp or another uh, residency and then travel back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. Those are, yeah, great words of wisdom, and leverages a lot on your writings and the blog posts and many books that you've written, Charles. How can our listeners and viewers learn more about your work?
Yeah, please visit me at up2minds.com and you can read my 3 chapters of all my book, and including my latest on self-reliance, which is kind of a discussing these same topics of the sovereign individual, and how to maximize your opportunities and self-reliance. So thank you very much, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Charles. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
The FRA Roundtable Insight Show is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell any securities. The investments, investment strategies, and investment philosophies discussed or presented on the show each involve their own unique risk factors which are not discussed on the show. Any discussions among the panel participants or responses to listener inquiries are based on the personal opinions of the panel participants and do not take into consideration the listener's suitability, objectives, or risk tolerance. Please be advised that you invest or speculate at your own risk.